All right, so welcome everyone to Unlocking Success in Housing, a deep dive into ESHI funding, strategies, and lessons learned. I'm Elliot Masuda, the Community Content and Engagement Lead at Foothold Technology, and I have the honor to be the moderator of today's panel alongside Carol Napierski, Vice President of Program Development and Grant Management at New York Alliance for Inclusion and Innovation. And what a great panel we have in store for you all today. I wanted to kick things off and provide a little background on why we decided to put together this panel before we have the panelists and Carol introduce themselves. So although ESSHI funding has been around for 8 years, it is a fairly new funding model for disability providers. So we wanted to pull together a group of providers that have utilized ESSHI before so that they could share their experiences. So no matter what your exposure to ESSHI is, whether you're a recent grantee or hoping to apply for the next round of funding later this year, we know that this conversation will provide great insight. So we'll begin with introductions in a second, and then we'll jump right into our panel discussion and leave a little time at the end for Q&A. If you do have any questions throughout the conversation, please use the Q&A feature, and Carol and I will be monitoring that. And so we'll either try to incorporate the questions into the conversation, or we'll be sure to get an answer to you after the webinar. So with that, Carol, do you want to kick introductions off?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And Elliot, thank you so much. For those that don't know me, my name is Carol Napierski, and I work for New York Alliance in Inclusion and Innovation, and spend a lot of my time looking at non-certified housing options from ISH to ESSHI. And certainly ESSHI is one of those housing models that, we as IDD providers are starting to get more into. Just because of the structure and the opportunities. And we wanted the opportunity to present to our members, from experts who are developing ESSHI housing in New York State. And I first and foremost want to thank Elliot. Elliot has put together this panel, this session, and the opportunity for us all to hear from subject matter experts. So thank you, Elliot, and thank you, panelists, and thank you those who are on today's presentation.
Great. And so from the panelists, Nancy, if you can kick us off and just tell us a little bit about your organization and then also your experience with ESSHI. Should I go to the next, Nancy, and then we'll circle back? Okay. Ashley.
I'm Ashley Keiss. I am the managing director of our supportive housing program with Lakeview Health Services. And just a little background on Lakeview Health Services. So we provide affordable housing supports and rehabilitative services for individuals recovering from mental illness. We support them in achieving their personally meaningful life goals. Currently, we have one ESSHI project located in Tompkins County, which I oversee. I did not participate in the development of, but I participated from getting it started up and leased up. So I currently oversee the services provided to the 18 ESSHI individuals that we have in that housing project.
Michelle?
Hi, my name is Michelle Gasma. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Project Hospitality, which is located in Staten Island. Project Hospitality provides an array of services from homeless outreach, drop-in centers, transitional housing, about 400 units of permanent supportive housing. There are city sanctuary shelters, as well as HIV services, mental health, substance use, and food pantry. We have one ESSHI contract since 2017, and it is a 16-bed program in a building that we developed with HHAP funding. And I guess that's it for the intro. I can get into more later.
Nancy, do you want to try again?
Can you hear me?
Yes, there we are.
Sorry about that. Hi, Nancy Harrington, Executive Director of CARES. We are located in Albany, New York. where we have our own supportive housing program, but we also serve 26 counties as the collaborative applicant lead. Our agency wears many hats, but most of our work is through the collaborative applicant role, bringing in the HUD funding. So for ESSHI, we have a mix of funding for our supportive housing programs, but we own and operate our own ESSHI program for formerly homeless with different disabilities. And we also are the ESSHI partner to the local Albany Housing Authority for a number of units. So we both own and operate our property with ESSHI, but we're also an outsourced case management arm to our local housing authority with ESSHI.
Awesome. And Tabitha.
Thank you. So I'm Tabitha Dunn. I'm the director of Unity House Domestic Violence Program, which is seated in Unity House of Troy in Rensselaer County. We're a not-for-profit organization that predominantly serves Rensselaer County, although we have a number of crossover programs. We do a lot of things: domestic violence services, we have a food pantry, thrift store, we do poverty services. We have a large mental health housing program. We serve those with HIV and AIDS. We also have a pretty large child program that serves children with developmental disabilities. And for ESSHI, I personally oversee 4 ESSHI contracts varying from 15 to 25 units. And in our larger program, we have additional ESSHI contracts. Our first ESSHI contract we rented up in 2017. So we've been part of the ESSHI planning system for a long time.
Awesome. Thank you. So I think that I think a place that I'd love to start the conversation around is um, how do you start conversations internally about ESHI funding if that's not necessarily on the organization's radar? And so I think this kind of maybe can touch on some of the benefits that you've seen from your ESHI contract. And Tabitha, I see you nodding your head, so maybe you can kick things off.
Sure. So I'm a head nodder, so I'll nod for everything. Just be prepared. I'm also chatty, so stop me if I go on too long. Um, so for us, what really started our ESHI conversations was the lack of housing and the lack of sort of appropriate, affordable housing with services in place. We operate a lot of HUD-funded housing. We operated rapid rehousing. I have trans housing contracts. Those are all really fantastic programs. But ESHI offers some additional supports and really gives you the opportunity to work either with a developer or within your own system. We have both types of contracts to build housing that represents dignity and respect for clients and can also build in some safeguards or some accessibility depending on the population you want to serve. I'll go on. So for us, it really met the need, right? Which continues housing. I'm sure there's nobody on this panel or on this call who doesn't know that housing in New York State is a significant and persistent issue. There's just not enough housing, and there's certainly not enough suitable, safe housing.
Yeah, I would agree, Tabitha, to your point that the numbers for homelessness, they're only increasing. Sheltered and unsheltered, our shelters are full. And it's a great resource, right? It covers rent. Although I know we're advocating in our own ESHI world to advocate for a higher price point per unit. And I think a lot of that's driven by a population that has a lot of needs. But it funds rent and staffing all in the same application. So to Tabitha's point, it is the funding resource that's out there right now. It's quite plentiful. It's, as far as I understand, as long as you have a good capital partner, it's not that hard to get. So it seems to be the funding to go for at this point.
I jump in too, and not specifically from an ESHI perspective, but just a housing perspective. We, have, like Tabitha mentioned, HUD and OMH, OASIS, and HAPA and HASA, various entities that fund our housing programs. So we're always interested in housing. But I think if you're not currently in the housing world or you're dabbling in it, I think is it part of our strategic plan? Is it part of what is going to provide more wraparound services for our clients? So I don't know everyone in the audience here, but to sort of take a step back and that, if housing is a priority for you, this is a lower threshold entry point to sort of get involved. And if housing is already a priority for you, this is another varied source that seems to be pretty well funded in terms of being able to have a self-contained program with funding for the apartments and services. Although I think you're right, Nancy, depending on the population, some additional services are needed. Our specific contract is for people living with HIV. So we have that's the population we're working with. And your oversight agency, in this case for ESSHI, would be OPWDD, I assume. And so I'll admit, we struggle a bit with the AIDS Institute. They can be more challenging, I find, even than OMH or OASIS, but we don't have experience with OPWDD to compare. But your oversight agency does provide some additional will provide some structure and guidance as to what you need to be reporting and what you need to provide.
It's awesome. And so, I'm not sure again where the attendees are, whether they've actually applied and received a grant, or if they're, they're looking to kind of explore. So, um, how would you like suggest to cultivate partnerships around like developers or strategies around, I'm assuming when you're applying, you kind of have those location maybe in mind, or can anyone touch on things that maybe they can do now that to help cultivate, or who they should identify and kind of players or things in that process?
I could take a stab just quickly, and I'll speak to two different approaches. As I mentioned before, we have two types of ESHI. One where CARES is the actual owner and operator of the housing, as well as the operator of ESHI. And on that point, we basically asked local folks, who have they used for development. And again, I want to emphasize this is partnering with the HHAP contract application for OTDA for the homeless housing. And so we knew of an architect in town, we knew of a developer, but I would say the best way to get referrals is talk to someone who's already worked with that partner agency, because it does matter on the developer side. That's very important. On the other end, as an entity providing the case management for the housing authority, for example, I would say there's probably more people that need not-for-profits to partner with than the other way around. Because currently, and basically the HHAP application, homeless housing and assistant for the homeless housing, has opened up to a new array of developers. And so there's a lot of affordable housing developers that are now getting into homeless housing and need not-for-profits to submit the ESHI application. So it is very common for an affordable housing developer to come into a community looking for a not-for-profit service partner based on their expertise with that population. And typically, it seems that they don't necessarily care what population, as long as the partner agency has the capacity to serve. And I think if anyone's going to go for it, they should talk to folks who have done it. But that being said, I feel not-for-profits are in a position where we're being sought after. Additionally, affordable housing developers, the way the contracts bidding is now, they get additional points for having homeless housing in their affordable housing development. So I'll stop there and let others share their experience.
I think I'll just kind of piggyback off what Nancy was saying. In what we did was the best thing that we could have done was to partner and kind of communicate with our surrounding agencies to again kind of see what their experience has been, what's gone well, what builders have they used and developers. I think that communication and that building of the relationship has been crucial to our ESSHI project.
And sorry, just a quick question on, are any of you currently looking to, like, in the development of a new ESHI project? Or, thinking of applying, for another round of funds?
So we are looking at for the RFP, I think that's coming out or due in May. We will be looking to possibly submit an application.
Same.
Yes, same. Because the other piece is if you have an application that's been approved and maybe you have a plan, but the developer's not quite ready yet, you can get a conditional award, and then when they're ready to go, you're ready to go, and that does help quite a bit with the process. You can also write them to be a little bit more general, right? So that because things change with ESHI. ESHI is a long process. So anybody who's looking to get into ESHI, be prepared. It's years in the making before you actually rent up. So there's a lot of negotiations with developers. There's a lot of, do they understand the population that you're going to serve? If you serve multiple populations like we do, it's deciding, is this going to be a DV population? Is it going to be an SMI population? Is it going to be frail elderly, youth? What services do we already have to support that? Are they going to need employment services? We have a wonderful employment program, NCP, that we can maybe weed that in too as additional supports. You really have to figure that out, and then working with a developer to understand the population and that things are going to happen, I think is really important, because they're not always thinking about what it's going to be like with 15 units of domestic violence housing on a single site in a 50-unit building, right? What could that look like 5 years down the road? They're thinking, this is what I need to get this project done, and really working out those processes ahead of time.
Elliot, do you mind if I ask a question?
No, not at all.
So I'm really intrigued. We have certainly a mixed audience, some who may be developing and starting to really spend time working with developers and have the internal capacity. Others are thinking about getting into housing. So I so appreciate where everyone started, how your agency started with ESHI and how you started with development. Would you mind also taking me back to, what was your internal structure? Did you have a whole development team, or did you work with a consultant to help you to, start that process? And has it over years evolved into more of internal capacity to work on housing development?
So we've kind of done both. We have partnered with local developers, and we have also developed projects. But we, at the end of the day, are always kind of take control over the service end once it's opened up.
Thank you.
I can speak of what we did and what I would do differently. So the first, we applied for housing development through homeless housing, HHAP, for 15 units, mixed population. And myself and another staff member, we wrote the entire HHAP application along with the ESHI. Once you've written an HHAP, ESHI seems so much simpler. But in hindsight, as the executive director, it took away a lot of my time, where in hindsight for me, I wish we had just built in the budget, because the budget allows for partnering and paying for like a lead consultant and developer. There's a development fee. So in hindsight, at least for CARES, because we have so many other hats, And if I were to do it again, I would hire a developer to take the lead and guide us through the HFP component. But as far as writing and taking the lead with each side, that's something we would always do.
Thank you. And Tabitha or Michelle?
I guess we had experience with HHAP. We even have some properties who've exceeded their 25-year time frame, but I and many of the staff who were there at the time of applying for ESSHI was not one of them, or not around to sort of go back to the exact thought process at that time. But we did we have subsequently sort of formed teams with developers who work with non-for-profits. So this is not specifically for ESSHI, but some of our 1515 contracts and other development projects that are outside of ESSHI. But the developers and those teams that are really focusing on these higher need populations and mixes of affordable and supportive type housing programs have a passion and a devotion to the work. So I think it is key to find the team of people that is committed, and even courting, a few different groups before you find not just the developer or the team that works for you, but even the staff within that you feel you can work with. Because as I forget who said earlier, it's a long process. There's been a lot of time working with people that finding the right group that can work well together makes that much more pleasant.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've had a long process. Like I said, we did our first run up in 2017. There was a lot of several years before that of work. And we have done it several ways. So we have a contract that pairs with the developer and the Troy Housing Authority, where we're the service provider. So the developer actually is the Troy Housing Authority has the vouchers, and then the developer does some other pieces. We worked again with that developer in a second housing project where we're the ESHI contract holders, so we do all the rental subsidies and the case management pieces. We also have our own properties, so we're the full holder on the ESHI contract. So we have about 45 units of housing between my program and the SMI program that we bought about a slate of 50 apartments that we redid and renovated across a number of years, and then we're able to put ESHI contracts in. So we're the property owner, maintenance provider, and the ESHI service provider on those contracts. And then we have another project that I'm actually in the process of renting up with a different developer. And I can say to you that I've learned things I would do differently and things I would do the same across every single one of those contracts. And as we grew in the ESHI world, there are benefits to working with a developer, certainly financial benefits, because they carry a lot of that weight. And they have some backing that you, as a smaller not-for-profit, are not going to be able to get right away. But there are also a lot of benefits to having your own units and developing your own projects where you control sort of the outcome of those units, and you're both the landlord through a separate program. We have a properties development program that came up with the ESHI. That wasn't something that we had initially, but we've really developed that across the last 5 or 6 years.
Great, thank you. And this question, it had been mentioned twice. I'm just very intrigued. 2 times I've heard that's a long process. How long a process is it overall from the time you start really developing the application to the time you start renting up?
Well, I think the ESHI one is not the lengthy one. It's the capital side of the ESHI, right? Because it has to partner with it. So to everyone's point, it can take a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can take years. So you want to be in it for the long haul. The ESHI application and that funding is the easy part. I would say no one should shy away from that. If you have a developer or property developer you're already working with on. So that part, and I want to mention, like, to Tabitha, it is more work to be the property owner and developer But if it's something you have the capacity to grow into, I find for my agency, it's better because you make a I don't want, well, if no one from the state is on, they'll say you make a profit from the rent. But essentially, as the property owner, you can take the monies earned and reinvest that in housing. So when we owned and operated our own, the rents that we collected above and beyond our costs, we were able to purchase property to do another development. So when you're the case management only entity, it's cost reimbursement, right? It's money in, money out, still mission served, population served. But there is value to being the actual property owner or manager if you're willing to take that on because you can grow your portfolio to you've got money to reinvest and buy more housing.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's 100% true. I also think the other really important fact with that is that because we're the landlord, we have a different appreciation, respect, and understanding for the client population. So, sometimes when you're working with landlords, they don't understand the population that we're all serving, or some of the struggles that populations experience, or challenges, or and they don't have a lot of patience for that. So when you have, and I get it, like I understand why they're in it, but when we are the landlord, we certainly have a lot more ability to make accommodations, to figure things out, to get boots on the ground, to work with clients, to remain successfully housed, which is really important, I know, to everybody on this call and probably everybody who's working in this field. So I do think there's a lot of benefits, but it is, to Nancy's point, it is challenging and it is a capacity thing that we could not have done that day one. We grew into that over time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with what others said about just the development is what takes time, but that the ownership is important. And I have a difficult frame of reference because I wasn't involved in the ESSHI project, but a more recent project we did started pre-COVID and ended post-COVID, which significantly shifted all reasonable timeframes. So I have a hard time predicting based on just my recent experience.
Yeah. There are other challenges that can come up too, like if they don't have site control, if the city or area in which the ESHI housing is going, if there's a lot of pushback from the local community, that can hold things up. That can hold things up for quite a long time. So there's other factors that play as well in the holdup of ESHI contracts.
Continuing on, can you just share some challenges that you all have experienced, whether it's through the application, the development process, even actually as the units are being rented, kind of any challenges, and I mean successes, but challenges that people might experience in the process.
Can start with one, piggybacking on what Tabitha started to go into. NIMBYism is something that you're going to need to know your community. So for CARES, to avoid the challenge and delay that NIMBYism can occur, we designed and built our housing within the current zoning regulations. So for example, and in Albany, we don't have a lot of multi-story tall buildings, although that is much more cost efficient and the state likes to see economies of scale. It's just not something we were going to pull off in our community in Albany. So we built 3-story, what look like homes from the outside, but 3 units, because the current law is you can only have 3 floors. So for CARES, we went in on a smaller scale, argued to the state why, because our site location is technically what's called the resource rich neighborhood. And so one is just knowing your community and are you going to fight the current zoning for a waiver? That is a Herculean task. That's one challenge, I would say. The other thing I wish someone had told me when we applied to do the capital and development, MWBE is a very serious requirement for the state. And in hindsight, I wish we had worked with an MWB architect, qualified one, of course, because meeting our MWBE goals for the construction was extremely challenging. So some things I think if people are interested and want to do a one-on-one, maybe with any of us, we could probably go through a list of things. But I'll turn it over to somebody else.
Okay, I'll go. So, I agree with you. The WMB is challenging. I certainly think New York State's trying to keep an updated list and help make connections, but particularly post-pandemic, a lot of businesses closed. A lot of smaller businesses, unfortunately, and sadly, weren't able to sustain during that time. So it's definitely a challenge. I think also another challenge is rent up. Sometimes you don't finish a project on the expected schedule, particularly post pandemic with all kinds of supply shortages and issues with trucking and varieties of things. So it's hard to get clients, particularly since you're looking at a homeless population slated. For example, if you think you're moving in February 1 and you have all these people ready to go and maybe their housing is ending February 2, but then December 31st, you're like, well, actually, we're not going to be able to get in until February 31st because we don't have clearance to do that. So there can be challenges. So really staying on top of that schedule of completion with the developer, making sure you have backup plans for those individuals, and that they're going to be able to be housed in case there is a delay. And then also people fall off. So the developers want you to have those units filled right away because there are financial consequences for them if you don't, and if there's a lot of turnover in the first year. So really trying to make sure that you have some plans for if a couple people fall off, and then also following any of the COC guidelines you have for fair housing is really important, and making sure that the developer understands your fair housing guidelines because they're going to want you to put the most nice and successful clients in the housing spots, and that's not how fair housing works.
There's a couple questions that kind of filtered into the Q&A. So this is just, do you need site control to apply for ESSHI?
Not necessarily.
It may help with your points or scoring, but requirement to apply.
Elliot, can I also ask about site selection since we're sort of talking about that?
Sure.
How do you choose your sites?
If you're working with a developer, they, have a plan already. And typically, that's in my case, we have like our most recent project that we're renting up into, we have 25 units, but there's over 100 units in the building. So that's a very large building. We're not going to, it's a community we know, but we wouldn't typically get pushback in a situation like that. If you're developing your own property, then I think you have to pay a lot of attention to what Nancy said and really be aware of the community you want to put the housing in and what the population is that you're putting in that community, whether that's a supported population or not, because one community may support for elderly or veterans, but they might not support a house full of young adults. um, so you want to try and weigh that out. And then also, the condition of the properties, how much money you're going to have to put in them to rehab them appropriately, what their condition is. And if they're in safe locations, you don't typically want to move these populations, which are all at risk populations, into unsafe areas if it can be avoided. I mean, that can't always be avoided, just given, in Albany and Troy, you can have a really fantastic block and then a block that's, and then a really fantastic block. So I think just depending on where you are, you have to be mindful.
Thank you.
I think to add, we always try and take into consideration, and I think it's required by some of our funding streams, the proximity to services and access to transportation and grocery stores and banks and things that people are going to need. Also making sure proper zoning for the building, environmental considerations, and then the size of the building. So we have our building is a 5-story building in the middle of a downtown, but there aren't a ton of, well, there weren't a ton of tall buildings surrounding it, but it's slowly getting, you know, everybody's kind of building up. So those and then just to reiterate what Tabitha said, making sure that it's a safe location and comfortable lifestyles. I mean, we're in the business of recovery and supporting individuals who have some trauma history. So making sure that we're being mindful of that and, you know, not exposing people to further traumas.
Thank you.
I think that kind of touches on, because the funding is for different various populations. So do you structure the physical environment differently depending on the population so everyone feels safe and comfortable? And if you do, can you kind of touch on maybe something that, you've done differently for different populations?
So I'll just continue. So the building architect that we worked with for our ESSHI project was on the same page with us about recovery oriented and trauma informed spaces. We actually in our ESSHI project, but in all of our housing projects, have kind of used the Healing Spaces book by Esther Sternberg to kind of model and create safe spaces for our individuals. And fortunately, our builder and developers and all of the people involved in our projects have been on board with that. So.
For us, that wasn't a consideration. We didn't build specifically per population. We have many populations in one building. So for example, we have youth, SMI and HIV. And then on our parenting, separate site for parenting youth. But all the units were the same. For us, we were focused on access to resources, but our population didn't have needs that, that I know of, although I'm learning something new that Ashley had mentioned.
We did take into consideration, particularly around safety for domestic violence in SMI populations. So all of our DV populations have some sort of security element via cameras, or we actually have a site that has a security guard in the evenings, locked facilities so that you have to come in double sets of doors before you can access those kinds of things, extra locks on doors to make them feel more safe. Lighting is really important. So making sure that all the walkways are well lit and that there weren't places on the exterior of these larger buildings that somebody could like jump out from. So those were features that we looked into for those populations. I do think if we have thought about doing some other types of populations, we would want to look at making sure that there are all accessible units. All of the programs we currently have some subset of accessible units because our population has a lot of challenges that they face. So we try and make sure that we're building in accessibility where we can. But I do think it can be challenging, especially if you're serving a lot of populations in one space, trying to make it as general but specific as possible.
I think I agree with everything you just said, Tabitha, but in our serving the SMI population or SUD and even people living with HIV, there's a lot of overlap and co-occurring disorders throughout. And so the security measures are similar for us too, like being aware of lighting, I think we have double doors at almost all sites, different. I guess another thing I'll just throw out there that might be a little bit different is ensuring Narcan is accessible on every floor. and accessible to the residents, not just in a unit necessarily, for overdose prevention. But I think you really covered most of it. I don't want to be repetitive.
Elliot, I just had one more question about technology. I'm intrigued. I love the use of technology as a natural support. And I think we've gotten into some of the discussions on the security element with technology. Do you also build into your design other pieces of technology for the units themselves or the building?
So we, just to kind of play off what Tabitha was talking about safety. So our buildings are secured and we have a fob system for people to get in and out. We do have cameras throughout. Safety is a huge priority for us. Within the units, we have like a communication system from the downstairs into the unit. So guests don't have to, necessarily go down. And I think those are the really big ones for us. But safety is, at the top priority.
And Carol, just to kind of ask, technology, is that kind of for the individuals with disabilities, like remote supports, like those kind of things that maybe they can think about, right, when they're doing this and working with the developer of like advocating to see if the developers would incorporate those into the units.
Yeah, absolutely. And depending on the the structure, a video doorbell, things like that, alarms within the bathroom, the communication system, are other big pieces. But making sure that the unit is, we used to say wired, but at least have the capacity for really sound Wi-Fi.
Yeah. And well, now all the appliances, right, that can kind of just be remotely monitored. I mean, there's just so much that can help in those that support
Yeah.
that.
We do have several in one of our projects. A really interesting thing that I've seen is this really cool fire suppression system that's all technology based, and it sits above the stove. So if there's ever a fire, it's a really awesome system. That's at one of our things. And then the other thing we were able to write in and support in the two of our contracts is Wi-Fi for all of our clients, so that we can take that bill from them essentially. And one of the buildings has Wi-Fi built into it. They were able to work out an agreement. So we've been able to try and ensure that clients have access to consistent Wi-Fi without having a bill that they have to pay to be able to get that.
Nice. So we have about 10 minutes left, and we have kind of a slew of questions coming in. So unless, and I want to also give time if there's just last minute pearls of wisdom that you want to share or anything. So I'm going to kind of go not in any necessarily order, but someone asked about the security guard. Did you plan for the security guard at the onset or decide later and request a budget change? And then, so I'll just let you stand. There's like kind of a couple of follow-up questions from that.
Real quick. So we planned for the security guard on the onset so that we could build that into the budget, though we had trouble hiring. There were some things that changed. We changed the hours. We thought, oh, this is what we think is best. But then once we had people in there, we realized we needed different hours. So it is a process. You kind of got to figure it out as you go. But we planned for that from the onset.
Okay. And then you kind of referenced, so did you consult with a company to provide the security guard then?
Yeah, when we were writing the contract, we consulted with several companies to get ideas for rates, hours, those kinds of things. Then when we were able to actually get in, we were able to sort of field with them about how we wanted to hire and interview somebody.
Okay. And so this next question, I think, is you did kind of the upfront work. So do you find it has been affordable to contract out to a security company long term? But it seems like you did the upfront work to make sure that it was incorporated in the budget. Awesome.
I think, Elliot, I don't do direct oversight, but I think we have struggled with that a little bit in terms of we had security for off hours, but we created a position called a client care and safety coordinator instead of a client care coordinator, so that during our work hours, we had the client care and safety coordinator was in essence security, and was someone who could also not just be security, but respond to client related needs. So someone who had an understanding of the population a little bit more than someone from an external company would. But then we needed to supplement that with someone else for evenings and weekends. Um, and just back to the question on technology and related to security, I know we do use a system that the security guards, as they patrol the building, have to scan and indicate where they are, and update any, loitering found in the hallway or disturbances or noises heard. So there's a little bit of a technology element involved in our security oversight.
Yeah, great. So this is like several questions. So what kind of support staff do you have within the program? And I am thinking just from the conversation that's going to depend on how your ESSHI funding is being attributed, whether it's you own it, if there's within a development. But if anyone could touch on that, that would be great.
So we have a housing worker attached who works, and this was part of our initial contract and our staffing patterns when we applied. We have a housing worker who bridges the gaps in between property management and the client to help them remain stably housed, to link them to services in the community, and things that they might need to maintain their funding, or access to food pantries, or whatever their needs are or whatever their goals are, to help them meet those. We also have a peer who we have working in our building alongside with the housing worker, again, to just help kind of bridge those relationships with individuals, because I mean the populations that we're serving, the homeless, they historically have had a hard time remaining engaged in services. So we've found that having that peer who has that lived experience has been crucial to helping people keep that relationship. So those are our in-house services. But then we've also found that just partnering with our local primary care offices and substance abuse clinics have been, we have them coming into the building to help provide services to people rather than relying on people having to go out. So those partnerships have been crucial in providing support to our individuals.
Yeah. We have a full-time housing liaison, we call them, but it's probably very similar. It sounds like very similar, depending on how many clients are in each building. For our units, where we have 25 units, we have 2 of those positions, but then we also attach a percentage of a therapist to the contract so that each of the housing units contracts have access to a therapist that they can meet with, which has been really beneficial. And then the therapist meets with them on site, like where they live, if they want. We also try and write into our contracts having office space in the buildings to be able to accommodate all of that. I know we didn't mention that before, but that is important. And then we also write in being able to access the community room for groups and engagement activities and those kinds of things. But having that therapist piece for my population that we predominantly serve here, it's been really helpful because it helps them work through and then stay engaged with services.
And there was a follow-up question, is it financially viable? And I'm assuming, again, this is as long as you roll this into the contract when you're applying.
It is.
Although I would say, surprisingly, the money goes pretty quickly when you do the budget, especially if you're including site administration. And that's why sometimes thinking of a piece of it to hire an expertise, what both folks have talked about, because there's no way this grant's going to afford a hazard case manager and a full-time therapist. One thing just to mention, I know that a trend that I've heard of that we want to explore for the next one is asking if you're not the property manager and it's a mixed, affordable housing development with homeless housing, is to ask the property manager to assume some of the costs for the security guard.
Mhm.
I think for the bigger developments, really, whatever we're calling them, but a face at the front door to greet people It's also in their best interest, so that might be a leverage point with the property.
That's a great point.
And so this, Ashley, I think you touched on this with the peer support and having a housing advocate, was it? So what are some ways you've kept tenants engaged in the volunteer activities offered to the set aside population? So for example, domestic violence survivors, we plan to have a menu of supports, but of course, all voluntarily. Um, so I think we kind of touched on that, but I wasn't sure if there was any addition. I think also probably being able to use the community room, bringing those support services on site so that it's easily accessible is what I heard. But if there's any other suggestions or other ways that you
I think you use all the same engagement strategies you use with any population. You're there, start with, getting to know them, you offer them assistance. We have a lot of additional services here. So if we realize there's a food insecurity problem, we can hook them up with meals and food pantry. If they have a transportation issue, we can help them with that. We also make it very clear to the property development if they have a resident who's not part of our contract who comes and discloses domestic violence or some other issue that we can help with, they refer them and we assist them. So I think when you're there and you're present and people start to see that you really want to support them in their success and their safety, not everybody's going to engage. We all know that, but a large majority of them are going to engage. Sometimes they don't engage for a while, but then all of a sudden they come down and they say, I haven't needed anything, but I realized you can help me with this. And then you can start rebuilding that relationship with time.
Great. And so I think we have a couple more. So how much money do you need to consider proceeding with, I think, the ESSHI application, or does funding come from the developer? Um, I'm not 100% clear of the question, but I think if
Well, each is a cap amount per unit. I think it's still currently 25,000 is the cap per unit. Is that right? Looking to the panel. So when you apply, the cap up front. I would recommend building a budget up to that cap. We didn't the first project, and I wish we had because ESHI currently does give you a 2% increase here. But fair market rates will change, FMRs, staff salaries will change. But anyway, there's a cap on how much you can apply for. And ESHI is for rent and the staff and any supports. The capital funding all comes from another contract.
Mm-hmm.
And this last question, I think, is specific to OPWDD, so I'm not sure if anyone will be able to answer, but are there any restrictions with OPWDD housing subsidy program? Yeah, I
Not that
didn't.
I know of. Yeah.
Okay.
And Elliot, I can certainly get back to Matt on that,
Perfect.
if we have any other follow-up on that. Thank you, Matt, for that question.
So Carol, do you have any last minute questions? I just want to also give about 2 minutes to give all the panelists an opportunity to any final words if they have anything. Carol, if you have anything as well.
No,
Wrap up.
Elliot, just honestly, truly a thank you to the panelists and those who have joined us today. To hear the stories and to hear, the pearls of wisdom along the way, best practices it's so vital. So I want to thank you all for your time.
Any last minute words?
So I just want to mention data. Proving your need is critical. And if you're not currently in the continuum of care or have a relationship, you want to reach out to the collaborative applicant in your continuum of care to get any data. You'll need to prove need, not just for the ESSHI application, but also for the capital. Your property developer will look to you for that. So I would say don't move forward until you can demonstrate a need to the scale that you're looking for, because you have to, you want to fill those units and show that it's a need. And if you want a bigger scale, maybe consider involving another population in your application.
Mhm.
That is a great note to end on. I just want to thank you all again for coming together. It was great to have this conversation and very well attended. So obviously there was interest in this topic, and I appreciate everyone's time. Tabitha, Michelle, Nancy, Ashley, and the follow-up email. Do you mind if I give out your emails in case anyone has any questions for you all?
That's
Sure.
fine with me.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much again. And Carol, it was great working with you on this.
Yeah, Elliot, again, thanks for pulling this all together.